photographs taken this morning on the surface of Mars. Why is that?
If you haven't heard of me, your parents will have heard of me, possibly your
This is going to move fairly fast. Take a look at this, okay? Y'all hear me?
No.
So, is that working? Is everyone hearing me? All right, is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Oh, yeah, sure, that's perfect. We're getting the feedback and everything. That's just what we wanted. Okay, so just to explain to you what I'm hoping to do over the next 40 or 50 minutes, is to try and give you, I'm conscious that a lot of you are you're leaving very soon, and I'm conscious that this is actually on the curriculum, the space program, the history of the space program. So I'm hoping to give you a little bit of insight. I'm actually going to try and do some serious work here, give you some ideas, some thoughts about how policy making was done in the Kennedy White House. But I do want to do something a bit more as well. I want to talk about space and the whole excitement of it. And one of the reasons I put this picture up is that, as I said, it was taken this morning on Mars. It's just a picture. It's not a particularly special picture. It's just one that the rover in Gale Crater snapped this morning, the Curiosity rover. She takes these pictures all day, every day, sends them back to Earth every few hours. And I downloaded this straight off the NASA server. So I suspect you may be the first people ever to see this particular picture. Yes. A moment of history for 30 seconds anyway. The other reason I wanted to show it to you is that I think it's important to emphasize we're going to be talking about history. And we're talking about Fado, a long time ago. So I wanted to make it absolutely clear to you that we're also talking about the future. And we learn about the future from the past. And the decision making that the decisions Kennedy made and how he made them are important. It's important to understand them today because we have to make very similar decisions, particularly in our own society, as we have to make decisions about technology and its place in the recovery of the country. But I've also wanted to show this Mars picture because I wanted to say to you absolutely categorically that the person, the woman or man who will be the first person to set foot on Mars is alive today. Not only that, they are doing their leaving cert, or the equivalent, now. It's possible, if things move quickly, it's possible they're already in college. But I think basically you are the generation who will land on Mars. So as you listen to all this stuff about the moon, and as you think, God, that's an awful long time ago, just remember that when you are setting foot on Mars, like Noel just now, you say to somebody, God, that fellow Leo Enright said I was going to do it. So I hope you remember that. First of all, of course, you've got to do a science or maths degree in college or engineering. But just remember I said it. It's perfectly possible that the first woman to set foot on Mars is in this room today. All right? Okay. All that said, let's start thinking a bit about space and about the way that decisions are taken. And I thought I'd begin with something just a little bit cool. So if we can have lots of volume on this for the video, I hope this works. We getting volume? Lots and lots of volume. Lots and lots of butter. Can we get some more butter? We're getting quite immersive. Okay, let me play it out of another system and see if that, let me see if the problem is that it's coming out of the PowerPoint. Just bear with me a sec. It all looked perfect a moment ago, but for some reason it's not playing the audio correctly, so just give me a moment on that. Let's see if this sounds. Yeah.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Lock your Sawyer's hatch and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on. Detach from station and make us be with you.
Irish bar in Cape Canaveral. Chris has a band, and they play in Cassidy's regularly. I've had the pleasure of joining them on many occasions. He's a great, great guy. But the question I want to ask, I showed that video for a reason, a serious reason, and that was I want to ask the question, how on earth, if that's the right way of putting it, did we get to this stage? There are people in this room, myself included, a few people in this room, who were born before anything left Earth and went into space. It's that recent. We've gone from 0 to hero in a very short space of time. How on earth did we do that? And we did it principally because of the decisions that were taken by political leaders in Russia, in Europe, in America, in Japan, in China, in Ireland. I mean, Ireland has a vibrant space program, and that is supported by government policy. And I'll talk briefly about that later on. But to answer the question of how did all this happen, I think in many ways the best place to start to try and understand it is actually John F. Kennedy. Because he was the towering political figure who supported the space program. And so the next thing I want to show you is a speech. It goes on for quite a few minutes, and I want you to, if you wouldn't mind, pay attention. Notice a couple of things. The first thing to notice is the people behind him. They're all sweating, okay? This guy is standing in Rice Stadium in Houston, and it is 85 degrees. It's frightening stuff. The temperatures were appalling that day in Houston. And as you watch, you'll see all the time, everybody behind them mopping their brow. And this guy didn't break sweat. So that's the first thing to notice. The other thing to notice is the power of his oratory. And that's why we decided to show this at some length, because showing clips of Kennedy doesn't really give you the feel for it. So we decided to show you most of the speech for that reason, so that you could get a feel for what it was like to hear Kennedy speak. Very, very few people can speak with the sort of authority Kennedy has. Another thing, just an interesting thing to watch. If you look at Barack Obama when he's speaking, just any time you're watching on the television when he's giving a speech, okay? You'll notice he talks like this for a while, then he talks like this for a while, then he might go here briefly, but then he's talking like this for a while, then he's talking like this for a while, like this. So it's like the guy who's watching a tennis match. Of course, the reason is he's reading the autocue. No autocue for Kennedy. So watch that. It's a particular power, a particular skill. Very few politicians have it. They all wish they did. I can only think of one person in Irish government in recent years who had this skill. And what she used to get into her car, she'd drive to an event, she'd be handed the script that was carefully written by the civil servants. She'd read the script in the car, and she'd leave it in the car. Walk into the room and deliver the speech to the audience, working the audience as she went, spotting people in the audience and all that. Only one person. I won't name her because it only embarrassed her and me. But it's very rare. So I'd like you to enjoy this for the performance that it is. This guy was a rock star. All right? So here we go. I hope this works. Yeah.
President Nixon, Mr. Vice President, Governor, Congressman Thomas, Senator Wiley, Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your president having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college, notice for knowledge, in a city, notice for progress, in a state, notice for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge. In a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds in reaching Venus, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight. This is a breathtaking pace. And such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. New ignorance, new problems, new dangers. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. William Branson, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulty, and both must be enterprised and overcome with admirable courage. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great inventions of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race of space. Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new right to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technologies, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Bryce play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Okay, that's about half of Kennedy's speech, and I thought it was worth playing it all because I wanted you to get a feel for the effort, as you could see, that he had to put in to persuade people that this was a good idea. I noticed on your survey before we started that there was significant support in this room for the space program. It's a myth that there was huge public support for what Kennedy was doing in the 1960s. There was some support, but the opinion polls that were done at the time are quite equivocal about it. Public opinion was definitely divided, and Kennedy himself acknowledged this regularly in his discussions with his advisors. At one stage, he turned to me and said, "Why should I spend $7 million finding new ways to improve the water supply and $7 billion on the space program? How do I explain that to people?" So we have to ask ourselves the question, why did Kennedy pick the moon and space? Why didn't he pick poverty or the race issue? I mean, Kennedy was speaking in the weeks just before the Birmingham church bombing, the anniversary of which, the 50th anniversary is next Sunday, where 6 young black children died. So America had huge problems, but Kennedy chose space as the thing that he was going to rally the country around. There were two reasons. The first reason you will see in your textbooks, and that is the Soviet Union, the race against the Soviet Union. Now that is absolutely correct. That was Kennedy's abiding and primary obsession. He said, I want to beat the Russians. He's quite unequivocal about that in private and in public, as we heard there. But there was another reason. And I thought it would be useful to tell you the other reason today, because you won't see it in the textbooks. It'll maybe give you a bit of an extra flavor for it. And that reason, in part, is this man. From Sing Street in Dublin. His name is Cornelius Ryan. Cornelius Cunning Ryan was a journalist. He was a war correspondent. He covered World War II. And after the war, in fact, later, much later in the 60s, he wrote a book, a famous book, The Longest Day, which became a great movie. If you haven't seen it, definitely worth seeing. He was a pioneering journalist throughout his life, for a whole range of reasons. But what I want to tell you today about this Irish guy who set America on the course to the moon landings. Connie, after World War II, he joined a very big magazine at the time, long since forgotten, but it was huge in America in the 1950s. He joined a magazine called Collier's Weekly. And he was an editor at Collier's Weekly, and somebody told him about a conference in New Mexico to discuss the exploration of the upper atmosphere. And they said to Connie, look, Connie, you really should go out and look at this. There might be something interesting. Connie was a bit dubious. He arrived along, and there was all these people talking about flying rockets into space. And Connie was not impressed. He was very, very dubious about the whole thing. And then a German guy stood up, an engineer, and laid out his vision for the future. The guy's name was Werner von Braun, who was to go on to design the rocket which put men on the moon. And Connie was very taken by this German. And he went up to von Braun afterwards and he said, look, I'd be interested in doing an article about you. And what was originally to be an article about Werner von Braun blossomed. So the first meeting was 51. In 1954, in 1953 into 54, Collier's did a series of 8 articles. Many of them, as you can see, were the front page article of the magazine. Basically, what Connie did was he got the best artist, graphic artist of the day, Chesley Bodestow, to sit with Werner von Braun and to draw Werner von Braun's vision. And the resulting series of articles, as you can see, they weren't in any real doubt that man will conquer space soon. Not someday or maybe, soon. This was 1952, 5 years before the first Sputnik. As you can see, the inside page, they were still saying soon. And the editorial was, what are we waiting for? So that gives you some idea of the tone of these articles. These were proselytizing articles. And they were astonishing in the breadth of vision that they displayed. And I mean, even down to space stations. We saw at the beginning Chris Hadfield aboard the International Space Station. But this really, there were a whole series of articles describing what a space station would look like. This at a time when nobody had ever got into space. With designs. Willy Ley was another great visionary at the time. They talked about voyages to the moon. They showed various designs for spaceships. This not entirely unlike the space shuttle. It actually isn't at all unlike one of the early designs for the space shuttle. And they even worried about things like they worried about space law. They talked about how the astronauts would be trained. I put this picture up because I thought it was quite fun. The idea here is that the astronauts, the prospective astronauts, live in this tin can for months on end to get the feel for what it would be like to be spending a long time in space. The weird thing is that the European Space Agency and the Russian Space Agency together actually did this experiment last year. They actually put 6 people into exactly this box and kept them there for the time it would take to get to Mars and get back, for 18 months. So, I mean, the prescience of this is just breathtaking. The other thing I thought it looked like was the Big Brother house. And it kind of has that look about it. So, they did stuff about, you know, how do you pick an astronaut? Can anyone spot the deliberate error in the headline? Hmm? Well, let's see. Let's see if they explain it. This prejudice began very early in the space program, and I'm sorry to report that it continued for a very, very long time. It wasn't really, I mean, Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, was launched in the early 60s, but the proper inclusion of women in the space program of Russia, Europe, or America didn't take place until the 1980s. It's one of the big scandals of the space program, but the subject, I think, of another talk on another day. So anyway, the overall, though, the impact of these presentations was huge in America. So much so that Walt Disney, the famous Disney Pictures, Walt Disney was so impressed that he commissioned his people to do a presentation, or to do a series of TV programs based entirely on Connie Ryan's articles. And that resulted in an even bigger public interest in space. So that by the end of the 1950s, everybody in America was talking about space, and everybody assumed it was going to happen. But they also assumed that America was going to be the country that was going to do it. And the big shock for them was when they realized that the Russians were way ahead of them. And that's, again, that's kind of where, that's where your textbooks come back in on the story, where they explain about how the Americans became obsessed with beating the Russians and so on. It was the shock of realizing that despite all the Walt Disney movies, all they were doing was doing pretty pictures. The Russians were actually building the rockets and ultimately launching the cosmonauts into space and landing on the moon and doing it with robots and doing all the things the Americans thought they would be the people to do. So I'm going to finish up pretty much there because I know that we're going to have an opportunity to have a discussion. And if anyone is interested in particular, I would recommend you go to the sources for Kennedy's discussions in the White House, in the Oval Office, with his advisors. The problem for me in this presentation is that the audio on these is not particularly good. And I experimented with it to see if there's some way that I could present it to you with a rolling script so that you could listen and read as it goes. I'll try and play it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I hope you'll bear with me, but I'm going to try and give you a flavor for the conversations in the White House. What's interesting about these conversations, and this again is stuff that won't come out of you won't get this in your textbooks. What's interesting about this discussion is Kennedy is mad for the moon. He doesn't want to hear any arguments against it. He's not that interested in space. He says that directly in this conversation, which we won't play all of it. We'll play a little bit of it just to give you a flavor. The man he's talking to is the head of NASA, Jim Webb, who was a wonderful guy. I mean, he was a great public servant, he had a great political eye for trouble. And he saw trouble with this Kennedy project. So he kept saying to Kennedy, this should not be your big priority, it should be one of your priorities. And he said to Kennedy, the reason this should only be one of your priorities is, he said, I don't want to be advising you to go to the moon, because I don't know if we can get to the moon. And if we don't get to the moon, you failed on your biggest priority, and I don't want you to do that. So this was a guy, you know, politics could do with a lot more of this sort of person. He's somebody who, when you listen to him, you'll hear, he doesn't care that it's the President of the United States he's talking to. He doesn't care that it's his boss. He just cares that his boss gets an absolutely clear, is absolutely clear about the advice that he's giving to him. So let's just, I'll just play a little bit of it. No, we've a couple of minutes yet, have we? Okay, so I'll just play a couple of minutes of it and see if we can, see if I can follow with the transcript. I've done up a transcript. This is a bit messy, but I'll see if this works. If it doesn't, no, that's the wrong one, sorry. It really won't work without the item. It really won't work without the transcript, and even with the transcript, I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so can you guys read that? Okay, well let me increase the size of it. I'll increase the size of it and just see. Let's just see if we can do this. We might do this. Okay, okay, you read that? Yeah. Okay, right, well let's try it then. I'm going to play a little bit of this, and if we all get fed up trying to follow it and read it and listen to it at the same time, we can stop. So this is very kind of on the fly. But I think it's interesting stuff and worth listening to.
This program is the top priority program for the agency. No, sir, I do not. I think it is one of the top priority programs, but I think it's very important to recognize here that as you have found what you can do with the rocket, and you found how you can get it beyond the Earth's atmosphere and into space and take measurements, several scientific disciplines that are very powerful that can begin to converge on this area. And I think it is top priority. And that's very clear. Some of these other programs, let's say 6 months or 9 months, I mean, things are going to happen. But this is important for political reasons, national political reasons, and for this is what we like to not intend to raise the second to the movement. It's nice. It's like we expect any time. So that I think we expect it like 6 months. It's a different kind of priority, and of course, that's very serious. So I think we have to take the view as top priority of it. The thing that troubles me here about making such a flat statement as that is, number one, they are real unknowns as to whether man can live under the condition that you ever make the lunar landing. This is one kind of political vulnerability I'd like to avoid such a flat commitment to. You say you fail on your number one charge, and this is something like that. The real framework is on which the future space colonization for 2,500 years will be based. Have got some studies about it, and the other part of it is that as to whether the actual landing on the moon is what you call the highest priority. They think the highest priority is to understand the environment and the areas of the lower places that operate up there as they apply backwards into space. You can say it this way, I think. Very wonderful that rather be. But the scientists in the nuclear field have penetrated right into the most minute areas, the nucleus and the subparticles of the nucleus. And yeah, out in the universe, you've got the same general kind of structure, but you can do it on a massive universe. I agree. But you have to use that information with everything. Now, the only one that information directly applies to the program.
Okay, it seems it's gone off the script that I've done. I thought okay, here we go. This is quite a useful exchange. Okay, so we're at this section here.
Everything is either Kennedy said preeminence in space was going to be higher by now. He was accounted for the preeminence in space by his social existence.
Okay, so you heard it there from Kennedy's own mouth. It's basically just audio confirmation from the president. These tapes are quite recently released, and they're still working their way into the literature in some respects. But as you can see, Kennedy there directly identifying the Russians as the main reason for them going to the moon. But I wanted there, just as I say, to give you a flavor for how this decision-making was going on. Kennedy knew he was spending a lot of money on this, and his primary focus was to beat the Russians. But it's my contention, and it's widely held, that the public interest in the space program that was engendered and started by Cornelius Ryan from Sing Street in Dublin was actually what put the Americans on a course for the moon. And I look forward to, from my bath chair in my dotage, reporting on one or other of you stepping foot on Mars. Thank you very much.